Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a review of the AYN Odin 2 portal. Let me talk about where my head is at before I received this, because I wasn't really interested in this at all. I spoke about it a few times on the newscast and elsewhere. That just wasn't for me. I pretty much have my Asus ROG Ally X as my big sort of device, and that plays everything that I ever want. I have the Retroid Pocket 5, that is my D-pad sort of device for PSP and under. And so I didn't really have a spot for the Odin 2 portal in whatever I use it for. So I wasn't really interested in it, despite the fact that I did pre-order the Pro model and the Indigo model, which I did swap to white now. But either way, I pre-ordered it because I always usually do when I have a handheld that I'm semi-interested in, but wasn't super interested in this either way. So I'm happy to report that I'm actually starting to change my mind a little bit on the portal here. I think it is a fantastic device. It definitely hits the streaming notes that I want it to, and I can easily consider this thing as a Logitech G Cloud 2, but better in every single way, especially since it can do more than just streaming. Thanks to the OLED screen and 120Hz refresh rate, which vastly improves the responsiveness and controls of the device, it makes me want to play more than just streaming on it, even if I don't have that use case. So the Odin 2 portal starts at $334 for the base 8GB, 128GB model with black only as a color. Then $398 for the Pro 12GB, 512GB model, which has black, white, and indigo as options. And then finally, there's the $501 for the Max 16GB, 1TB model with all three colors available once again. Given that the base Odin 2 is $299, that is a $35 price increase from base to base, or $30 from the Odin 2 Pro to the Odin 2 Portal Pro. Spoilers, that $30 is eaten up right away by a bunch of amazing things, so yeah, the price difference is negligible at this point. So, well, what do you all get? And let's compare the Odin 2 to the Odin 2 Portal. Let's start with what is the same. It is the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor with the Adreno 740 GPU, which at this point is a mature combination for Android, with lots of custom driver support, and it is still a great choice. There is the 3 RAM and storage options of 8GB of RAM, 128GB of storage, 12GB of RAM, 512GB of storage, and 16GB of RAM and 1TB of storage. Still DisplayPort out, still Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.3, Android 13. Both have a massive 8,000 mAh battery, active cooling, and that's about it for similarities. Differences-wise, there are quite a few. First, there is no more micro HDMI port at the top. Instead, it is just the single USB-C port that does both video out and charging at the same time, which is fine. The portal works with docks and everything nicely. The big change, of course, is the screen. The portal has a 7-inch 1080p 120Hz OLED screen with over 800 nits of brightness, and it is just beautiful. Whereas the Odin 2 screen is a 6-inch 1080p 60Hz IPS display. Design and material-wise, they are massively different as well. Let's take a quick tour. The sticks on the portal are taller than the Odin 2's by a large margin, gives it a much wider range of motion, and it helps when playing a lot more modern games through streaming or even just emulation-wise. It is a nice change. AYN will also have larger stick caps available that should help transform these into slightly closer to full-size sticks, but not there yet. These are more similar to Anbernic's 406H or 406B in height, and they feel more of that than a modern controller. So it is not as small as the Odin 2 sticks, but it is not as big as an Xbox controller sticks, for example. I would say they're right in the middle. On my end, I would love to see full-size sticks, but I've been having a really good time with these either way, especially for modern game streaming. My personal favorite change though is the D-pad. The Portal's D-pad doesn't stick out as much as the Odin 2's did. It's also bigger by a slight amount, and it's looser feeling. Now, AYN and Retroid have had the same type of D-pad style for a while now, and we've seen this in a lot of different models at this point, but this is my favorite iteration of the D-pad so far. It's larger, it's looser, it is still very accurate. This is a fantastic D-pad, and it is awesome to see. I did a longer live stream when I received the Portal, and I tested the D-pad out quite a bit. I found that it was great in each situation for platformers, Pokemon, and fighting games. My second favorite change to the controls is the buttons. Not only did they make the buttons larger, but through that, they brought them closer together thanks to the new size. These new buttons are more flat than the rounded Odin 2s are, and they have a slightly more muted sound to them. But they still have the same sort of feel as the Odin 2s does. My third favorite change to the controls, because honestly, all of the controls got updated here, and for the better, but it is the shoulders and triggers. Both got an update with textures on them to help make them a little bit more grippy. On the Odin 2, the shoulders are more of a mouse click style, whereas here on the Portal, they're slightly more muted, and they have a bit more travel to them. It doesn't matter where I push on the shoulder buttons, they do their function as well. So there's no real dead spots, which is great, as these shoulders are much larger than the ones on the Odin 2. Moving on to the triggers here, and it is the same exact idea. The triggers are much larger than the Odin 2s, and they still have a great range of motion with no real dead zone issues when pushing the triggers down. They feel and play fantastic in different uses, like racing games or even just shooters. Overall, if I'm looking at just the controls alone, really the only improvement I would point to is moving to a full-size stick at some point. Otherwise, this is as close to perfect as you can get for a handheld controls. From controls, let's talk about the overall comfort. The Odin 2 is more compact and it's slightly better grips on the sides, which contour to my hands pretty nicely. I've always said that the Odin 2 is very comfortable, and that opinion hasn't changed almost a year and a half later. However, the controls on the Odin 2 are not offset with the D-pad and the right stick being right below the other controls. And so it's not offset at all, and while it was never a personal issue of mine, I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with that fact. Their right thumb would hit the right stick quite often, and so it kind of sucked. On the Portal, the grips aren't as pronounced on the back as they are on the Odin 2, and in practice, I didn't find it to be a concern at all, as it was still very comfortable to me. The controls are offset on the Portal, leading to a lot better positions for your thumb, and while my right thumb still did occasionally touch the top right of the right stick, it wasn't enough to be a concern, and it should solve that problem for anybody that had it on the original Odin 2. My biggest concern with the comfort is the slippery plastic. I found it tough to maintain a good grip holding the device when it wasn't resting on a table or it wasn't resting on something. Lying down or sitting and holding the device in the air, I can feel the device sort of slipping out of my hands due to the plastic. It isn't grippy at all. Now, AYN is selling a grip for $15 US, which, depending on the feel and material of it, should hopefully fix this. But as usual, I never look to a grip or outside accessories to solve what is a design flaw. This part is a decent negative to me in getting comfortable with the device. And while ergonomically I think the Portal is great, the slippery part has been tough to get used to, and at this point, I'm really hoping the grip fixes it. Let's conclude the tour part with a continued note on the plastic. Viewers of my live stream saw me share the back of the Portal a few different times throughout the stream, and it was quite a fingerprint magnet. There's smudges, there's fingerprints, and all of it are visible on the plastic. And it is another area that I think AYN should improve upon in the future, as Retroid figured all of this out with their Retroid Pocket 5 and Mini, and even some of their other devices. At this point, let's talk about the screen. I mentioned it before, but this is a 7-inch 1080p 120Hz OLED panel, and there is absolutely zero comparison to the Odin 2. It is a massive upgrade in every way. At launch, the Odin 2's panel was decent. It wasn't great, but it was decent. Fans like myself were enamored with the performance and the rest of the device and sort of made do with the screen. Personally, at launch and using it for months, I was actually quite happy with the screen on the Odin 2. And it was really only after I moved away from the Odin 2 to other devices that I started to see the flaws in the original Odin 2's panel. On the Portal vs Odin 2 front, there is no visible ghosting like the Odin 2 has, And it's tough to measure without expensive tools, but the responsiveness of the portal on input lag and delay and all of that is so much lower than the Odin 2's. And I'm assuming that is thanks to the 120 Hz display, but whatever it is so much better. To put it simply, if you had a problem with input delay or responsiveness on the Odin 2, the portal absolutely solves it. And this is becoming a bit of a theme in this video. Now, there is a toggle on the Odin 2 portal when you swipe down from the top that lets you change from 60 Hz to 120 Hz, because as default, when it arrives, it is actually in 60 Hz mode when you unbox it. But there is absolutely zero scenario that I can think of where I would ever use that 60 Hz mode. 120 Hz is beautiful, it is fantastic, it makes this entire handheld. I would never ever go back. So if you're thinking of buying this and sticking in 60 Hz, I got nothing to say to you. The screen itself, being OLED, is gorgeous. We are eating well this year when it comes to OLED devices. The RG556, the Retroid Pocket Mini and 5, the Odin 2 Portal, and so on. It is a nice year for OLED handhelds. I can't say that I'm noticing anything unusual on the display itself. Like for example, the AYN Pocket Air had very saturated reds, whereas to my eyes, the Odin 2 Portal screen seems pretty accurate to me. I think if you're going to nitpick OLED display panels in this hobby, at this point, you're going to have a bad time no matter what. And I would take a slightly less accurate OLED than a budget IPS display that we've been seeing lately. So with that, in my eyes, OLED great. Me like OLED. Let's jump over into the software now and talk about the minor differences and additions. On top of adding the 60 Hz to 120 Hz toggle, AYN also updated the joystick LED options. You can now change the colors separately for the sticks, the brightness, the saturation, and more, and you have a whole wheel of colors to choose from. It is an actual nice addition and a welcome one. Other than that, there is no visible other differences that I could tell in the software. I was kind of hoping for some Odin tools type functionality baked in, where it would let you set the performance mode and fan mode and even control mode on a per app basis, but no such luck. Honestly, the big difference software-wise is just how much of a difference 120 Hz makes on these types of handhelds. It is a big difference in responsiveness and just how smooth it is. On the battery front, the Odin 2 Portal is absolutely insane. Like, just crazy numbers. Looking at sleep drain, and it is slightly above average at 6% drain over a 24-hour period when it is in sleep mode, which is great. Android is awesome. Then all of my tests are 100% to 0% battery drain, Wi-Fi on, Bluetooth off, 100% brightness, 10% audio, and 120 Hz is on, of course. For Game Boy Advance, I got a whopping 14 hours of battery life using the standard profile with Quiet Fan. For GameCube and PS2, at a 3x resolution with performance mode and Quiet Fan, it was a massive 10 hours of battery life. And lastly, for Switch and Android games like Honkai Star Rail and so on, with high performance and Smart Fan, it was 450 minutes or 7.5 hours. These are absolutely fantastic numbers for battery life. Okay, so let's talk sound now, from fan noise to speakers and the like. On the fan, and I suppose the heat front, most of my testing was in performance mode with the fan on smart, and at no point did I find the portal to get hot. I did lots of testing, especially for the battery tests, and while sometimes the grip part of the device would get warm, it was never uncomfortable and it was never hot. It was just slightly warm, and it wasn't a Trim UI brick warm. This was just a normal warm. Even doing my 7-hour Switch battery test, it got warm but never hot. I wasn't able to get it to a high temperature during any sort of use. The fan is a different scenario. I wasn't able to pin it down, but there are lots of times where the fan was acting as a fan, and you rarely hear it. There's air being pushed out, and it's doing its job. But then I would run into some scenarios where there was a bit of coil whine, or that kind of high-pitched sound. And it wasn't super loud, but it was enough to annoy and bug me. I experienced the same thing on my Odin 2 Mini when I was playing Nintendo DS with fast forward on. So it's a very specific time when this fan does it. but there must be a certain speed of the fan where it starts to make that sound. Now, it definitely bugged me, and for the most part, the fan is inaudible and it is fine, and I can't recall ever going into a super speed mode whenever playing anything, so it was just a minor nitpick, but it is something that annoyed me. Okay, I'm going to do some small portions now of me just playing the device with varying volume levels, so you can hear the controls, the volume, and so on, and I'll also have a decibel meter in shot so you can just see how loud it gets. Here's my overall thoughts. The buttons and so are pretty muted. They aren't Retroid Pocket loud, and they have more muted clicks and such, and that should be a good thing for a lot of people. The speakers, however, are a different story. My first issue is the minimum volume is just too loud. I'm hoping it is something that they can adjust with software because it's just too loud at the minimum. The second concern is the actual speaker quality. Let me clarify. To me and my ears, it sounds fine, and I don't really have an issue with it, like I did on the Retroid Pocket 5, for example. But it does sound wildly different compared to the Odin 2, so let's have a quick listen to both. So it's different, and while it's very far away from saying they're bad, I think this will likely be a divisive topic for a lot of people because when you have nothing else to complain about, you complain about the nitpicks. At this point, we can jump into performance and games, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here as the performance is well documented at this point. This is the third Odin 2. There's an Odin 2, Odin 2 Mini, and now the Portal. So if you need to see how things run, there is tons of videos and things like that all over the internet. I actually want to look at streaming first because that will be my personal use case, and I think this absolutely nails it. Most of my testing this week was streaming through Artemis and Apollo as the backend, PX Play for PS5 and XB Play for Xbox, both cloud and local streaming from my actual Xbox. Going to actually use my Ally X as a comparison point here since I find it to be fantastic for streaming, and so we can do some side-by-sides for Artemis and Moonlight. Depending on the game and the scenario, I've seen between 5 to 10 ms decoding time on the Odin 2 Portal, which is great. On my live stream, it was slightly higher than 10 ms, and I assume that that was probably because I was using the PC to do the live stream with OBS and everything. But in my personal tests, it's typically under 10 ms for Artemis. And there's also another feature called Warp Drive in Artemis that will get it to sub 5 ms in a lot of scenarios too. It was the same sort of scenario with both PS5 and Xbox. Overall, if you're looking for a G Cloud 2 type of device, this is everything you wanted and more. And yeah, GeForce Now also works and the controls are recognized. Then we have the usual emulation and Android games tests, and just like previous Odins, the world is your oyster here. A year later, the Odin series is still the one to beat for compatibility and performance and stability across everything on Android, and it is absolutely no different here on the Portal. But I do want to point out something on the 120Hz screen. I mentioned it before, but the responsiveness cannot be understated. It is fantastic, and it is a crazy difference between this handheld and others when it comes to just even input delay or how quickly you can do inputs. It is near instant. I had an absolute blast with it, and my normal Super Mario World tests went fantastic, and it felt so responsive in a way that I'm just not used to. Now, another potential benefit of the 120Hz display is something called black frame insertion, which you can toggle on in the newest builds of RetroArch. However, I tried this across multiple cores and systems, and it creates a pulsating black frame across the entire picture that you might not see if you're not susceptible to it, and that would be great if you aren't, because there is a bit of a benefit to it, but for me, it just causes headaches and nausea. I tried a bunch of different combinations of settings and things to see if I could get it not to do that, but no such luck. I'm filing this under experimental because it is, but this one really got to me in a very bad way. It's worth it for you to try it out yourself, but I'm probably not going to. It actually made me sick. I think if you're susceptible to PWM, this will probably affect you as well. I'm actually not susceptible to PWM, but this absolutely made me sick. The D-pad makes it fantastic for older retro games, since I like playing Pokemon quite a bit, and I find that to be very comfortable to use, and the 7-inch screen makes DS just look and scale fantastic. PlayStation 2 is going to have the usual problem games that it always has, but you can upscale to 3x and even 4x and 6x in a lot of different scenarios for a lot of different games, especially if you are docking this to a 4K TV. You can get pretty close to 4K or even 4K in some games. Now, GameCube follows the exact same scenario, and if it wasn't for Dolphin on Android not having retro achievements, I would probably be playing a lot of my GameCube games on this device because it just feels so good. Honestly, it's just awesome. Throwing everything at 3 to 4x and just having it run and having it be so responsive is just great. Switch emulation is last, and there's not really much to say here. You have a ton of custom drivers to use, lots of compatibility, and Switch emulation is hit and miss as usual, but you would have probably the best time out of any other Android device playing it here just due to compatibility and performance. This is getting to be a long video, especially by my standards. I like to make everything just quick and concise, so let's start to wrap things up here. In the case of should you buy an Odin 2 or Odin 2 Portal, the answer is extremely simple, an Odin 2 Portal. However, I would highly suggest that you don't buy the base model. 128 gigabytes of storage is just too small, quite literally. Android games like Honkai Star Rail, Genshin, and so on are at least 20 gigabytes each. And if you want to do HD texture packs for GameCube and PS2 and so on, which you'll want to do with the screen, you're going to hit that 128 gigabyte cap really quickly. And no, you can't move this stuff to the SD card, unfortunately. I would suggest that you get the Odin 2 Portal Pro at $399 US instead, but it is your money. In either event, base or pro, the Portal is a better purchase in every single way over the Odin 2. There's no way I could recommend the Odin 2 anymore. In the case of the Retroid Pocket 5 versus the Odin 2 Portal, do you want a larger Retroid Pocket 5 with the sticks in the right place and no ergonomic issues? You'll pay for it, but you'll get that and a lot more. There is a lot of nuance to this question, but I think if you're even asking this question, you can afford both. And in that case, unless you have a size requirement, pick up the Portal. And lastly, in the case of you're already sold, which model do you buy? And the answer is the Pro. The RAM ended up being a non-issue on the Odin 2. Even 8 gigabytes of RAM was enough for any emulation and a lot of win-later use as well. However, the 128 gigabytes of internal storage is just too small. And so my suggestion is the Pro at 12 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte internal storage, because that covers the best of both worlds. The Max is too expensive and unnecessary. You don't need to buy that. Nobody needs to buy that. Save your money with the Pro. I'm still working on where this fits into my life. As I mentioned before, the Ally X, the Retroid Pocket 5, the Odin 2 Portal. I don't exactly know where I will fit this. Probably just for streaming, I think, because of the screen and all of that. But it's making a case. It is making a point for me to try and move some things around to see where I could use this as a daily driver. The one caveat to the Portal that I do want to mention is we have a lot of x86 devices coming out this year. A lot of them are going to have OLED panels. Some will have VRR. Some will have 120 Hz or better. And so we're going to have scenarios where there will be x86 devices that are better than this. But the problem is they're going to be more expensive than this, probably by at least double the price of this, because there isn't anything close to this 1080p, 120 Hz OLED panel in an x86 device that is light, has long battery, all of that. So you still have some time, I think, but we're getting pretty close to x86 devices taking over this space, even on the Android side. We're not there yet. The Odin 2 Portal still has a case to make, even at $400. The Steam Deck crowd isn't going to like it, but they don't like anything besides the Steam Deck. So if you still want an Android device and you were looking at the Portal, it's an easy recommendation from me. Little nitpicks and all that sort of thing aside, it's a great device. That's going to be it for this one. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about retro handhelds, play some game of the month, ROM hack of the month, all that sort of thing. Support me on Patreon if reviews and my guides are helping you. Otherwise, appreciate you all for watching and hope you all have a good one.